Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going over the history and geography of India. And if you can hear that outside, it is storming outside, so there's a little bit of rain in the background. If you've got your headphones on, you can probably hear it, but I think it kind of adds to the ambiance. And now my cat's drinking water, so whatever. Anyway, India. India has a very varied geography. As you can imagine, it is a massive country. Let me grab pointer pencil so I can point out everything to you. I'll just try to go north to south. So starting off in the north, we have the very famous Himalaya mountain range, where the tallest mountains in the world are located. And India has the third highest mountain in the world. It isn't on this map, but it's right around here-ish. It is Mount Kanchenjunga, I believe it's pronounced. Because, we have Mount Everest right here, the highest mountain in the world. It's just a very, very big mountain range. And it was formed when this tectonic plate, the Indian plate, moved up and smashed into this tectonic plate and created these mountains. They're very, very new mountains, especially compared to a lot of the other mountains throughout India and just in the world in general. But they're very, very big and still growing, of course. As you can imagine, it's very snowy and cold up here in the mountains. Very, very high, big old mountains you can see up here. It's a good picture of it. But also up in this region, we have some disputed territories. We have a big piece of land right here. Hold on, there's a couple of elephants on my notes. There we go. Relaxating, it's called. And we have a smaller one over here, known as Demchuk, I believe. They're administered by China. There's another one up here. They're administered by China, but India still claims them, so I may as well mention them in the history and geography, I suppose. And then we have this space over here, Jammu and Kashmir, which I did talk about in my History of Pakistan video. You can see this border right here is all X'd out because it's a very disputed border. This border was established during a ceasefire or a peace treaty, but India doesn't quite recognize it. They still want to claim this land. Pakistan still wants to claim this land that India has, so it's a big to-do, I suppose. But it's created a lot of war and strife, and it's the most militarized corner of the world. And yeah, we'll touch on that in its history, of course. The Himalayas are also very important because the melt from all the snow and glaciers creates all of these rivers that you see flowing down here, including the two most famous, most important rivers in India, which would be the Ganges. You can see, sorry, I'm leaning from the mic to make sure I get it right. We have the Ganges River, and over here we have the Brahmaputra River. They all flow out into this corner, the mouths of the Ganges. The Brahmaputra flows into the Ganges eventually. But these rivers, in particular the Ganges, are very, very important to the Hindu religion and just the history of India in general. This delta area is mostly contained within the country of Bangladesh, which I've also already covered. You can check that out, but it also comes to India as well. This region over here is known as the Sundarban National Park, which I also did a whole video on, which I really like. It's mostly about the Bengal tigers that live in this area, and they're really, really neat. They're unlike any tigers elsewhere in the world, and you'll have to watch the video to find out why. So, let's see, we're up here in the north, and we have the Ganges River, and the river creates a really lush green valley, which is basically called the Gangetic Plain. I've seen it called a lot of names throughout this research, but that's the most common one. So it's basically this whole green region down here and going up to here into the Indus Valley of Pakistan, and just basically containing like all of this up here, which has a huge population of people. It's also where the capital city of New Delhi is located. And then just over here we have another interesting geographic feature, the Thar Desert. And this desert's pretty barren and sandy, a pretty typical kind of desert. But mushing in with the ocean here and the sand and the monsoon rains, we get this area right here. It's called the Ran of Kutch, and it is mostly a salt plain, and you can even see it if you look at like satellite images. You can actually see like a big white spot here from all of the salt from the water and the sand, and creating that interesting geographic feature, I suppose. Moving on to the center of India, it's mainly known as the Deccan Plateau, and it's formed by two big mountain ranges creating a kind of V shape for this plateau. The mountains are the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats. So the Deccan Plateau is like the valley in between these big kind of more hilly mountain ranges. Like, I think it's like, sorry for all the likes, I'm Californian. I think it's just because I've been used to looking at pictures of mountains looking like this in India that I see these and they're like, oh, they're kind of hilly and lush, but they're mountains as well. There's a couple other important mountain ranges throughout India. We have the Vindhya Range and the Satpura Range right here. And these create a dividing line between northern India and southern India. And let's see. And of course also India has a big, lush, long coastline all throughout the bottom half of this peninsula. And it's in this region that we find the biggest city in India, Mumbai. And let's see. Oh, I forgot this whole section over here. This area over here, it's Bangladesh kind of intersects most of it, so it's this area over here is the big jungly part of India. Think like Jungle Book India, like the more forested jungly area of India. But there's a little bit more to India than just this big piece of land. There are two other island chains. The Lakshadweep Islands are just over here. They're not on my map at all, but they're like basically like right around here or so. There's like info about Sri Lanka over there, so they cut out the Lakshadweep Islands, which is kind of a bummer. But anyway, but we can see this island chain over here kind of got cut off. Sorry. Islands down here. These are the Nicobar Islands, and up here are the Andaman Islands. And the Andaman Islands are mostly famous for the Sentinelese people, who are one of the last few non-contacted people on Earth, meaning that they live in total isolation. They still live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They don't have any kind of modern technology that anywhere else in the world has, and they're very protective of it, in that if you try to go there, they will spear you and not allow you to come on the island. And there's very, very few footage of these peoples. It's mostly, if you know Star Trek, you know how important it is to leave the native peoples alone. But anyway, let me look over my notes, make sure I got everything. Oh, I did leave out the Chota Nagpur Plateau, kind of like the plateau region between the Gangetic Plain and the Deccan Plateau. Also pretty forested as well. I was reading that, I didn't double check this, I just read it randomly, that this section up here was the Indian tectonic plate, the Indian plate, that as it shifted, mushed up into this part of the world. So that's basically all that's left of it from the big mushing together of the Himalayas. I think that's pretty interesting. So the mountain ranges you see down here along the coast and all the hilly mountainy regions all throughout are very, very old in terms of world geography. I think that's interesting as well. And with that being said, I think I'll dive right into the history. So, the first Homo sapiens to arrive in India would have come around 55,000 years ago. And it would have been around 6500 BCE that farming would have started around the main river areas of India, mainly the Indus over here and along the Ganges as well. And I did, of course, talk about this in my Pakistan video, since now it's located in Pakistan. But the Indus River over here, creating the Indus River Valley, created the Indus Valley civilization. But the civilization wasn't just limited to what is now Pakistan. It spread out into what is now India, basically like around this whole section over here. It was a huge civilization. It had the largest population of people at the time. There were millions of people in this civilization. But it's believed that with climate change and what have you, the river changed its course, leaving some cities flooded, some cities dry, so they moved over to the Ganges River Valley. Also, during that time, from about 2000 to 500 BCE would have been when the Aryans invaded, which were people from about, like, Eurasia over there. Like, you know, the region where, like Turkmenistan and that region over there, kind of like where Asia meets Europe. They were believed to have come from there. Due to climate, they also lost their land, so they traveled to find it and settled in this area and mingled with the people that were already here. And it's known as the Vedic period because the Aryan people had religious, like, texts and poetry and verses and things called the Vedas. And the combination of the Vedas with the indigenous religion, which we don't know a lot about because we can't read their writing, created Hinduism that we know of today. And one of the lasting effects of this mingling of religions and cultures, other than obviously Hinduism, was the caste system. So the caste system is a belief that people are born into specific categories, and some categories are better than other categories. At the top would have been the Brahmins, who are the priests. Then it would have been like the nobility, all the way down to like the poor people. But then there was one even below that, known as the untouchables, where it was seen, I mean, originally it was like the more indigenous people here, but it was people who like cleaned out garbage and, you know, did the undesirable jobs of the culture. And like I said, they were considered untouchable, and you could not marry outside your caste, so you were born into it. A few other religions sprang out of this area of the world. By the 6th century BCE, Jainism evolved from the teachings of Mahavira, and Buddhism evolved from the knowledge of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. And those really took off throughout India during this time. And it was during the 3rd century BCE that the Mauryan Empire came to be. So a quick note, this is a brief history of India. I'm going to skip over some things. I already skipped over a ton, so it's for the sake of time, but so essentially the Mauryan Empire was a combination of many other smaller kingdoms throughout northern India being conquered and combined, not to mention the Persians, and then Alexander the Great had come by and sort of opened the door for this part to be taken over, and thus the rise of the Mauryan Empire led by Chandragupta Maurya. The most famous ruler of the Mauryan Empire would have been Ashoka. Chandragupta's grandson. He expanded the territory vastly, vastly, vastly. And then he waged war against the Kalinga Empire Kingdom. It would have been, I believe, down in like this area over here. I didn't mark it down in my notes, but I believe it's like over here. And after the huge battle to take over this kingdom left so many people dead, it really shocked Ashoka, and he converted to Buddhism and spread a message of peace and love and harmony for all people all throughout India. And he built a lot of temples and stupas. But after he passed, the kingdom fragmented and broke apart. And another note, I should say before I keep going, is that I did a lot of research into Indian history and, figuring out what I can leave out, what I can leave in my video. And on all the comments I saw on like History of India videos on YouTube and articles and stuff from people in India, which is what I was really looking for, they were saying you left out southern India. Like, oh, this was a great history of northern India. You forgot this, you forgot that. But, most of the you forgot categories were about southern India. So I want to leave a quick note about that. It seems that like the main headline news of Indian history all sort of happened in the north, but that doesn't mean that nothing happened in the south. There were many, many great kingdoms and empires that rose up in the south, and the very south, the Tamil region over here, was never actually conquered by any of the northern kingdoms that I mentioned up here. They remained very, very strong, and I've mentioned them in a few of my other videos, particularly my Sri Lanka video. They were very like seafaring people. They traveled out and traded all over the place and spread their culture all throughout everywhere. And during this time period, it would have been like 200 BCE to 200 CE. The Chola dynasty was also really big. I mentioned them too in, I want to say also Sri Lanka. I think they conquered Sri Lanka. And the Pandya people, the Pandya Empire was also really huge. There were just, a lot. It was a very important region. I want to stress that. I don't want anyone to feel left out because, like I said, this is a massive country. They have a lot of history, and I'm just trying to put it all into one video without it being 4 hours long. Maybe some other day, but not tonight. The next great empire I want to mention would be the Gupta Empire. They rose in about the 5th century, and it basically picked up all the pieces that had fragmented from the Mauryan Empire and combined it into their new empire, expanding it even more. But in about the 10th century, there was a new series of invaders. They were Muslims, like I said, from that region of like where Europe meets Asia, that little corner up there. And they brought Islam with them, and they started to assimilate into the culture. And in 1206, the Delhi Sultanate was created, which is how we get to know Delhi. And this was a big Islamic empire, very dominant in the region, until like the 13th century when Mongol raiders came. The Mongols spread like wildfire across Asia and Europe. They didn't really hit India like they hit other countries, but they did leave their mark, especially in terms of the Mughal Empire, which rose in the 16th century. Mughal as in Mongol in their language, I suppose. And the Mughal Empire was probably, I want to say, the strongest out of all the empires I've mentioned before, in that they had really solid connections with their neighbors. There was a lot of prosperity with some of their big rulers. They were really into architecture. That's where we get the Taj Mahal in Agra and many, many other famous Indian buildings at the time. They were really into whole art and architecture, things like that, and really into being, at least at first, more harmonious with the other religions that were in India, especially since as time went on, India became majority Hindu and the Mughals were Muslim. But as time went on, they became more militaristic in their religion and their rule, and that really weakened them in the long run because not everyone wanted a strong Islamist country to live in. They liked the fluidity, I suppose. But it was at this time, when that empire was just starting to fragment, that the Europeans got involved. And along the coast down here, we had the Portuguese, or the Dutch. Up here we had the French, and then the British came and really, really wanted this land. And they fought with the other European powers throughout the 18th century for control of the region. They really gained it up in the Bengal region. They conquered that basically by 1765, and using a lot of tactics like getting in touch with the Rajas and princes of India and convincing them that they should support them. We're the richest, most powerful. You don't want to deal with the French. You don't want to deal with the Dutch. Help us defeat them. And that basically led to Britain being in control of India. By about the 1820s, they had their fingers in all the pots. They were essentially running the show, which the Indian people did not like very much, and that really came to a head during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. What really sparked that was that some soldiers, some native Indian soldiers who were helping the British, realized that their their bullets had been wrapped in like pork, basically, which is really offensive to the Muslims, because it's against their religion to deal with that, and against a lot of Hindus because they were vegetarian, didn't believe in animal products like that, and they were offended for their Muslim neighbors as well. So that was what really set the ball rolling. People were unhappy before. This was the straw that broke the camel's back, and there was a huge rebellion which the British crushed. And it was that event that led to Britain being like, okay, we don't need the British East India Company running things anymore. We're going to run things here now as a government. And they took control of the country and made it part of the British Empire and controlled every aspect of politics and how people lived. They built roads and bridges and railroads and infrastructure and things like that. But pretty infamously, the British did not treat the actual Indians themselves very well. There were a lot of famines during this period, very intense famines that Britain didn't really seem to want to fix more than they wanted to fix, like a school system for the British children who were living in India, and, things like that. That was more of their priorities, not so much the people who were starving to death. So a movement came up again to try to get India away from the British, but the people knew that violence wasn't going to be the answer. So a non-violent movement was led by Mohandas Gandhi, eventually called Mahatma Gandhi out of respect. This movement especially came to prominence after World War I, where people were conscripted to fight over in Europe, and after the Amritsar massacre of 1919. It's right up there, Amritsar. The British had outlawed mass gatherings because they didn't want peace movements and things like that. But the day that they announced that, there was a holiday and people gathered, and the British fired on them and killed many, many people, and it was really horrific. The nonviolent movement, the peace movement, continued up through World War II, where, of course, Britain basically was running out of money and couldn't afford to run India anymore after that, so they agreed to independence, and they also reluctantly agreed to what's known as the partition. So this area and this area were predominantly Muslim. This area was predominantly Hindu. And as independence became more and more likely, more and more Muslims wanted their own separate state because they were worried that the Hindu majority would outweigh the the needs and wants of the Muslim population. And it just seemed to work out at the time that that was the best thing to do. So after independence in 1947 and the creation of Pakistan, which this was also called Pakistan, it led to the largest mass migration of humans in history, as Muslims living in India moved to Pakistan and Hindus living in Pakistan moved to India. It sparked a lot of riots, it sparked a lot of horrible things, but it also sparked the Jammu and Kashmir conflict up here, because it was predominantly Hindu population, but it was run by Muslims. So no one could really agree about who should control it, and it is still an ongoing dispute to this day. We don't really know when it's going to end. There seems to be no end in sight for this. There's been 3 major wars in this area. Both India and Pakistan have looked into nuclear weapons very concernedly. It seems like a problem that I feel like no one really discusses, because I feel like I'm not going to put my personal feelings about it, but and then of course there were the disputes with China, which are still ongoing, but not as aggressively as this is. And essentially that's where India is today in its history. There's been a lot of interesting political instances that have happened. There have been like the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated because she wanted, I don't even want to talk about it, it's really sad. She wanted a attack on the Sikh people gathering at Amritsar, and she had Sikh bodyguards, and they instead assassinated her. There's been some political turmoil with the current Prime Minister Modi, how he's been running things. But as a nutshell, the Indian economy has really boomed in the past 60, 70 years. They've really invested in IT, and, Bollywood is a thing. Mumbai used to be called Bombay. They have the second largest movie industry in the world after Nigeria. Not America, they're number 3. And, the population has absolutely exploded in India. It's the second largest population in the world, and it's projected that they will surpass China and become number 1 in the next 10 years or so. And that makes them the world's largest democracy as well. So I could go on with all the little political things, but I put that in the list of things to skip in its history because it's interesting, but it's not super important to the history of India as a whole, because like I said, they have a huge, impressive history, and I could go on and on. I skipped so many things, you guys, but why don't we just head into this book, show you some pictures. Here, of course, we have the world famous Taj Mahal, considered the most beautiful building in the world, which I totally agree. And a lot of people don't know this. I find whenever I mention it, people are like, really? But it's like the main reason why the Taj Mahal is here. This is a mausoleum. It was built as a tomb for Shah Jahan's favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. And, after she passed in childbirth, he was so stricken with grief that he wanted to give her the most beautiful tomb imaginable, with gardens and jewels in the walls and everything. Like I said, the Mughal Empire were all about absolutely stunning, beautiful architecture. It was really their thing. I'm sure there's pictures in here of the Red Fort as well, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Taj Mahal. But anyway, there's a sweet elephants here, all painted up beautifully. There it is, the Red Fort. We've got some women here. Looks like they're collecting water from their well. This woman is collecting cow patties and shaping them so that they can be burned for fuel. What else do we have? Doing laundry in the river. And this is a little outdoor village school. All ready to learn. Working hard in school. This is a really beautiful map of India. I really love the bright colors, making it so easy to see India. And all of the major cities all throughout. You can see all the rivers. You can really see the shape of this region over here. Very interesting. You know, I didn't talk about the borders. This is a good time to bring it up. That India borders Pakistan. Disputed over here. And a bit with China. We have the Chinese border here. Border with Nepal. Border with Bhutan. We have Myanmar over here. And of course, Bangladesh. And almost bordering Sri Lanka. Just barely. Little strip of land went missing there. You can learn about that in my Sri Lanka video. Here's some sweet little water buffalo. And here, a gorgeous jungle river. Little jungle cruise. Here's the Tar Desert. Like I said, it's that stereotypical barren, sandy, dry desert. A really cool geographic map of India. You can really see the little mountainy regions, the plateau, the flat desert. So here it's called the Gangetic Plain. There's way too many names for this region. I wish they would just pick one. You can see the mountains up here. And yeah, all the different little regions. Here's Mount Kanchenjunga, which, like I said, I believe that's how it's pronounced. I really hope so. The third highest peak in the world. Some rice fields. And this is the Ganges River. It looks like there's some other fields along it. But very important flowing river. This is neat. Let me look in here and find the name of it. It is the Gateway of India. It's sort of like the British Indian equivalent of the Statue of Liberty, like welcoming people to India. My pencil just rolled off, that's okay. Here's the Western Ghats. Really beautiful. You see what I mean? Where I was like, oh, they're like not as rocky, but they're very rocky. They're very old, beautiful mountains. A very, very beautiful waterfall. And the Himalaya valleys are so pretty. What a beautiful place in the world. Okay, so YouTube, don't hate me. These are wild asses. They're not donkeys. They are known as asses. And that is their name. And they're very shiny and really cute. These are rubber trees. They grow in the wild, but as you can imagine, the British loved that and created a lot of rubber plantations. The beautiful banyan tree, which just like branches out all over the place, creating lots and lots of shade. The national flower of India, the lotus. Like, this is a picture. It looks like a painting. It's such a beautiful flower. Some beautiful birch trees, very Jungle Book aesthetic. Some Asiatic lions, very cute. The Bengal tiger, the national animal. Here's a map of all the wildlife sanctuaries. I'd point them out to you, but this video is already going way too long. A golden langur, lots and lots of monkeys in India. A mongoose, little rikki tikki tavi, and a beautiful peacock. And cows. Of course, cows are very sacred to Hindus. They don't eat beef, and most of the time when older cows are, not useful anymore on the farms, they just let them go because they can't kill them and they wander the streets. This one's eaten some flowers off the ground, probably after some kind of festival. History. Wow, this is from Mohenjo-daro. Beautiful carving. And this is a statue, very famous one, called Priest King, even though he probably wasn't a priest or a king, but we'll never know, from Mohenjo-daro. This is Alexander the Great. Meeting, it says King Porus. And very famously, when Alexander invaded, he stopped just after the Indus River, right when he was hitting the other mountains over here. And his men wanted to turn back because they were tired. The Maurya Empire. So here's a cool map. You can see all the other kingdoms I was telling you about. Kalinga over here. The Chola, the Pandya, Sind, Kashmir. all sorts of different kinds, but this was the Maurya Empire. And here's a beautiful statue of Buddha. So, another thing I didn't have time to talk about in history. This is St. Thomas. He apparently appeared in India, in here in the Kerala area. And it was like in the year 30, or not 30, couldn't be, like the year 60, maybe 52, I was so close, to bring Christianity to India. And even though it's a minority religion, there's still many Christians throughout India. Here you can see some exploration maps. Marco Polo came by, Ibn Battuta visited, went around Sri Lanka, looks like Vasco da Gama visited. Lots of explorers. Here is Vasco da Gama himself meeting with a ruler. And a good map of what the Mughal Empire looked like. So Babur was the first ruler of the Mughal Empire, and Akbar was the one that really extended things out. And here is the Red Fort, the big compound in Agra. There's Akbar crossing the Ganges River. This is Madras, one of the British shipping ports. This is in 1640, it says. This is the Sepoy Mutiny, or the Indian Rebellion, however you want to call it. Here is Gandhi doing a peace march. This looks like a newspaper showing independence. You can see the flag of India and the flag of Pakistan. That same magazine showing the violence that happened after that. This is Dr. Ambedkar, who was born an untouchable, and he came to be a very respected lawyer and politician despite his caste. I forgot to mention that the caste system was technically abolished when India became its independent self, but a lot of aspects of it are still observed. So it's so ingrained in the culture, you can't really just outlaw something that's been there since the dawn of their history. But technically the caste system no longer exists, but it kind of does. Here's Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister of India. And this is the building that she asked her troops to attack people who were protesting her in. It was like the #1 most holy site of the Sikh religion. And this is Rajiv Gandhi, her son, who became prime minister after her. Let's see, this is the Secretariat building in New Delhi. Casting her vote. The national flag. So it says, India's flag was designed when the nation won its independence from Great Britain. Its 3 horizontal bars are saffron, white, and green. The color saffron stands for courage and sacrifice. The white band in the middle represents purity and truth, and the green symbolizes faith and fertility. The flag has a blue wheel in the center called the Dharma Chakra that was designed by Emperor Ashoka many centuries ago. It stands for the importance of law and duty in all life. The wheel also recalls the spinning wheel that Mahatma Gandhi encouraged Indians to use to make cloth so that they would not have to depend on British goods anymore. This is the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. Here's the Indian Parliament. Map of all the states and territories, which is like way too much for me to go into right now, the different territories and what have you. It's a little complex. Panchayat, I believe, like a traditional way of solving problems, just talking it out. Here's an election rally. And parading their missiles, which, I hate nuclear weapons. I don't approve of anyone having nuclear weapons. Here's a map of New Delhi, the downtown important government area. Very, very beautiful. Zooming by fast on the tricycle cart, it says. And here's a picture from Mumbai. You can see the high-rise apartments next to the shanty town right there. Let's see. People living on the rooftops, it says. Poverty is still a big concern in India. They use the Indian rupee. Wow. Working hard on the farm. It's a muddy day. Look at all this wheat. That is way too much wheat. My cat's snoring again, if you can hear that. This guy's a tea taster. What a great job. I want to be a tea taster. Here are some people working on electronics, a big industry in India. Here's a resources map, all the different resources, which again, I don't want to get into. This video is getting too long. Here's an oil rig off of Mumbai. And it says here these people are visiting a bird sanctuary. That's a fun trip to take. A train station in India. Heading off to school in their school uniform. It's a busy, bustling day. Sitting down to eat a meal, it looks like. A little happy family. Cute babies. And my cat's snoring so loud, I apologize. A population map. You can see it's very, very densely populated all throughout India. Except up in the high mountains, of course. Some Kashmiri shepherds, it says. These women are from Gujarat, and this person is of Dravidian descent, the sort of more indigenous peoples of India. A Mongoloid person from Sikkim, and a really beautiful festival, looks like. Very colorful, like all of India is. Here's an example of the Hindi alphabet. And this shows all the different languages spoken throughout India. There are so many different dialects and languages. It's a lot. So, yeah. Out on the railroad tracks. There are little shanty homes there. A very beautiful temple. That's lovely. And here's prayer flags. This is Holi, one of the festivals that Hindus celebrate, the festival of color. They just throw out this colored powder and water on each other. I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's the most famous thing about it. Here's a little statue of Shiva, a Hindu god. Sri Ramakrishna, a teacher and spiritual guide. And these people are in the Ganges River doing some holy bathing. Beautiful mosque. It's time for prayer. This is the mosque in Delhi, it says, the Jama Masjid, I believe. Some Buddhist monks in training. And this is a Sikh man, an example of really fancy dress and their turban and beard for men. These people are leaving an offering at a statue, but I really want to see what this statue looks like. Look how big it is. I want to see the rest of it. And here are some Christian children. Looks like they're at school. Isn't that beautiful? Traditional music and traditional dance. They're playing cricket. Cricket being like the #1 sport in India. Here's Ravi Shankar, probably the most famous Indian musician. Especially, you know him if you love the Beatles like me. A very beautiful traditional dance. And this is a play depicting scenes from the Ramayana, one of the very, very famous works of literature from the early Vedic period. This is the most beloved poet of India, Rabindranath Tagore, which I hope I said that right. I've been practicing. He's a very beloved poet. And some beautiful carvings from the temple. Look how intricate this is. Absolutely beautiful. This is on one wall in the Taj Mahal, just some typical, inlaid stones and jewels in the wall. Making a little statue. This is Satyajit Ray, a filmmaker. And some billboards advertising some films. Let's see, it looks like it's time to make some food. over the fire. Morning prayers. You've got your little religious icons there. Very important part of the day. Working hard in the field. And here's a Hindu wedding. Very huge affairs. Oh my gosh, it's like a multi-day celebration. Drinking some tea. Here it's talking about the different types of clothing that Indians wear. You have here, they're working hard in school and hanging out at school. And a little family in their house. And a sweet little eating some yummy rice, it looks like. And they're preparing pan, it says. It says right here, betel nut spices and lime paste wrapped in an edible betel leaf. When people chew it, it makes their saliva red, so when they spit, they leave little red splotches on the ground. It's supposed to be like a palate cleanser. Well, that's the end of our book. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I've got lots of cool India videos coming up for you this week. So if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so you won't miss any of them. Thank you again for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night.